We are going to learn the properties of human language. Although there are noticeable differences between human languages, languages are also similar in many ways. How human language differs from other languages of other animals or communication system of other animals. Animals use some signals to communicate with the species. Humans also use some signs and signals. So in that sense, communication is one of the defining features of language, or one of the main functions of language is to give opportunities and to give ability to communicate. However, now we are going to explain properties or universal properties of human language. So when we talk about properties of language, we want to start with the very basic properties, what we call reflexivity. And what is reflexivity? Reflexivity, let's say, when animals communicate, we have really doubts to question that whether animals think about what they communicate. For example, when a dog barks, does a dog also barks to think about his barking, or does he bark about barking? But one of the properties of human language is that humans use language to talk about language. Humans speak to talk about speaking, and write to discuss writing. So that is the very basic properties of human language, that it allows us to think about language, to analyze language. So we use language to talk about language. This reflexivity, as I said, this property allows us to analyze language. There are other 5 properties. By the way, most of the things that I am going to talk here about properties of human language is taken from George Yule. So George Yule also mentions 5 other properties of human language, and these are productivity, and then arbitrariness, and then we also have displacement, and cultural transmission and duality. So cultural transmission, and duality. Now let's start with this displacement. Let's talk about displacement. Okay, what do we mean when we talk about displacement? If your dog or if your cat says meow today, you really do not know whether it is talking about any incident about yesterday, or it is going to talk about something it is going to do tomorrow. Mostly when a cat says mews, it probably talks about here and now. It doesn't talk about yesterday or tomorrow. So it looks like that animals' communication seems to be designed for this moment only, for here and for now. However, human language refer to past. It also talks about future. Most importantly, human language has the ability to talk about something which even does not exist, or which will probably never exist. concepts such as ghost and fairies and angel and things like that are not very certain in very objective reality. Therefore, although they do not exist, human language is capable of discussing and talking about that. So that is displacement. We can pretty well talk about what we did yesterday and what we can talk about also what we will do tomorrow. Although some animals such as honeybee arguably show some aspect of this property called displacement. For example, bee through some pattern in their dance try to communicate the exact locations of the source of the honey. However, in an experiment, in a very interesting experiment, we have seen that bees cannot communicate the location of honey source. For example, in an experiment, the bee hives were on the foot of a radio tower, and the food was on the top. 10 bees were taken to the top of the tower, and then when they were taken back to the beehive, they tried to communicate to the other bees about the source of the food, but we have found that the other bees could not actually find the source of the honey or the food. That means simply that probably honeybees cannot communicate, or they do not have probably a word for up. They have only ability to communicate locations for horizontal positions, but not for vertical positions. So the second property, or probably I would say the most interesting property of human language, is arbitrariness. So arbitrariness, what does it mean? What is arbitrariness? There is no natural or iconic relation between a word and its meaning. That is to say, there is no natural relationship between the word and the concept or the object that it stands for. Let's say, why do you call a cow a cow? Is there, let's say, this word cow? We use this word in English to talk about a four-footed domestic animal, cow. But is there any cowness in the word cow? Does a cow smell like a cow? Or does it look like a cow? Does it taste like a cow? I'm talking about the word. Now, in Bengali, cow is not a cow, it's guru. So you can see that different languages have different words for the same object. Therefore, we can clearly say that there is no intrinsic relationship, or there is no natural or logical relationship or link between a word and the concept or the idea or the object that it stands for. Now, someone may argue that there are some words which indeed sound like, kaku, for example, or in Bengali don don or ton ton, with very rare exceptions of such words which we call onomatopoeia or onomatopoeic expressions, but they are very few in numbers. Apart from these onomatopoeic expressions, words and the meaning are in a kind of arbitrary relationship. There is no reason why a cow should be called cow. There is no reason why you have a name what you have. So that is what we call arbitrariness. And so arbitrariness, as I say, that is one of the most important or very interesting features, because indeed you can see that we can call a cow, if you want to, you can call a cow by some other name, but it will not make any difference. Yes, I remember Shakespeare's famous quotations like, "What's in a name? A rose by any other names would still smell the same." So there is nothing in name. There is nothing in a word. The thing that we indicate by a word is completely our own wish and our own fancy, our own invention. So that is what we call arbitrariness. let's talk about the fourth properties of language, which is called productivity. And again, this is a very important productivity, one important aspect of human language. What are the properties of human language? What it means by productivity? Humans are capable of producing new utterances, new words, novel utterances by manipulating the linguistic resources. Let's say we have been creating new words, new structure, new expressions, new way of saying something. For example, people are expressing the same thing in many different ways by using different expressions. These are what we call productivity. Now, we are not very sure whether other animals also other animal communication or communication system has the same features of their communications. For example, dogs do not create a new way or new style of barking, a new way of expressing that it is bored or it is hungry. It uses the same words from time immemorial, probably. But humans have been creating new words and new expressions. So it is this productivity that gives human a kind of freedom to express new things, or to give names to different things they create. But animals use the same, as I said, same expressions, which is also we call, they have the fixed reference. This phenomena is known in animal communication as fixed reference. The fifth property is cultural transmission. What happens in cultural transmission? We can also say that human language is non-instinctive, or it is cultural transmitted. Humans, language is not passed from one generation to another generation automatically. Probably you inherit the complexion of your parents, the facial features of your parents, or some of the habits and attitudes that your parents have, but you do not necessarily inherit the language of your parents unless and until you spend time with your parents. You are not born with your parents' language. Although we know that humans are born with some general ability to learn any language, but they are not born with a specific language. So a human baby, a Bengali, let's say a human baby of a Bengali parent, if it is taken to China after its birth, and if it grows up with Chinese people, it will end up speaking Chinese. So we can see that human language is not genetically transmitted, but it is culturally transmitted in a social setup. What about animals' communications? Animals do not need to, be exposed to kind of communication input that they have. Rather, when a dog is born, or a puppy is born, rather, it usually learns how to bark. It doesn't have to be taught how to bark. So animal communication or animal language that done is instinctive, that they are born with it, and it is not a learned or acquired system. But in case of human language, it has to be learned in a social setup with the help of other people, with the help of interaction, meaningful interaction and meaningful input from other people. The last property that I'm going to discuss is called duality. Okay, duality. Okay, that is an interesting property of human language. What it means, what we mean by duality is this: human language actually functions at two distinct levels. So we have two levels in human language. One, what we call, is at sound level, and number two is at meaning level. Okay, for example, at one level, humans produce distinct sounds, such as, let's say, this one, ba sound, and a sound, and ta sound. So ba itself has no meaning, and of course we do not create sound without any meaning. One of the objectives of human language is to convey meaning to others. So we have ba sound, a sound, and ta sound. So at one level, we call it a physical level in which we are producing speech sound, and then at another level they are combined to make meaning out of them. So we combine ba, a, and ta in certain sequence to get the meaning bat, the flying creature bat. We can still change the sequence and make a new word called tab with other meaning. So you can see that language functions at two distinct levels. One is at very much, at the sound productions level, and then how you combine these sounds at another level to get meaning. So that is what we call duality. With all these properties, now we can understand that how human language differs from animal languages. However, when humans talk to animals, we know in many instances, we have plenty of examples where a human owner of a dog is talking to its dog, and the dog seems to understand every bit of it. Dog is sad and happy depending upon what the master is telling. How do then humans communicate with animals? Do animals understand human language, or how is it happening then that dogs understand humans, or some other pets also follow humans' command? For example, horses, or even cows and cats. There have been a number of experiments about, let's say, if a puppy and a human baby is growing up in the same environment, getting the same amount of, language input, getting the same amount of attention and care from human, we find that the puppy is a very poor learner, not knowing and not learning any word that human baby is capable of producing and understanding. Maybe puppy is a poor example. Let us take some examples from chimpanzees. A number of experiments have been conducted with chimpanzees. And one of the earliest experiments is in 1930 with a chimpanzee called Gua. We have found that in spite of giving lots of training to Gua, Gua was not able to learn human language. Gua was not able to produce any word. There are several other experiments with chimpanzees which proves that chimpanzees do not have the physically structured organ of speech to produce, or vocal tracts to produce words like humans. So there was an interesting experiment in which American Sign Language, a language used by deaf people, so sign language was used. Chimpanzees were trained to use sign languages. In one experiment, chimpanzees were kept in a very natural setup with people around without a kind of non-experimental setting in which people were using sign language to interact with the chimpanzees. And we have found that there was some considerable success in chimpanzees learning sign languages. Chimpanzees could also not only just produce the sign language, but they could also combine these sign languages to produce sentences. In another experiment, we have seen that a mother chimpanzee was taught the language, one language, or sign language, but it did not do very well. But interestingly, we have found that the mother's adopted son, who was a young chimpanzee, that was doing wonderful in learning the language, the sign language. Although it was not taught explicitly, which means that also chimpanzees has the ability to acquire systems if they are exposed to. So what does all this mean? Do we then claim that chimpanzees can actually use language? or do we say that no, it is use of language, or the ability to use language is only unique ability of humans? Let us, for the time being, think this way, that probably it is not the case that either some species have the language or do not have the language. Let us think in terms of in terms of a kind of continuum. A 2-year-old baby, and the way it interacts with adults, and the way it expresses its its emotions and feelings, we call it a kind of language, or we say that the baby is able to use language. In the same way, we can see that probably a chimpanzee can also interact with the people it knows. So on that same ground, both of them are using language. However, there is a very strong, very stark difference. The human baby goes on learning language and extending it to the discourse level, and underlying the communication system of the baby is a very complex set of words and sentences, whereas chimpanzees, in that very fundamental and abstract sense, cannot go on learning language. So we can see that it is the difference in which actually human differs significantly from other species. So in that sense, that language is a phenomena unique to human being. Language as we know it in its complex structural system, it is complex systems of systems, and its complex ability to express something which exists and which even does not exist. So I hope that you understand the properties of language. If you have questions, please feel free to ask those questions. Thank you.